Across the African savanna lives an animal that even the most experienced hunters approach with caution. It is not the fastest creature on these plains, nor does it possess the overwhelming strength of a buffalo or an elephant. Yet incredible sense of smell, razor-sharp hearing, and dangerous tusks make every encounter a serious challenge. That animal is the wild boar. For the Hadza people, bringing down a wild boar is about far more than securing a meal. It is a reward for hours of tracking, observing, and outsmarting an opponent that is rarely easy to defeat. As the first rays of sunlight spread across the savanna, the men quietly leave their camp carrying nothing more than wooden bows and arrows tipped with poison made from natural plants. They kneel to study fresh tracks pressed into soil and even pay attention to the lingering scent left behind in the air. For the Hadza, reading an animal's trail is every bit as important as shooting accurately. Many successful hunts are decided long before an arrow is ever released. A skilled hunter knows exactly when to move forward and when to remain perfectly still, waiting for the right opportunity. After hours of following the trail, the hunters finally spot a group of wild boars rooting through the dense brush in search of food. The men advance one careful step at a time, making sure not to snap a dry branch or disturb the surrounding grass. A wild boar may not notice someone from a distance, but the slightest unfamiliar sound is enough to send the entire herd disappearing within seconds. At this point, the hunt becomes a game of strategy. Every move must be carefully calculated because the prey is constantly watching and reacting to even the smallest changes in its surroundings. The moment finally arrives. One hunter slowly draws his bow, and the arrow flies straight into the shoulder of a boar. Its loud squeal sends the entire herd scattering in every direction. Even wounded, the boar charges forward with incredible power. Instead of rushing after it, the Hadza calmly keep their distance, following the fresh tracks and broken branches left behind. Patiently, they wait for the natural poison on the arrow to take effect. Sometimes the tracking continues for hours beneath the scorching African sun, but patience has always been one of the Hadza's greatest weapons. Hours later, the long pursuit finally comes to an end. The hunters take turns carrying their hard-earned prize back to camp. At the same time, the women return from a long journey to collect water, balancing heavy containers on their heads. Something just as valuable as any animal caught on the hunt in this harsh landscape. Each person contributes in a different way. One brings back meat, another brings back water. Together, those individual efforts provide everything the community needs to survive another day. The evening meal soon begins. The wild boar is carefully cleaned, divided into portions, and roasted over glowing coals. There are no elaborate recipes, expensive seasonings, or modern cooking equipment, yet every step reflects generations of experience. The smell of roasting meat mixes with the smoke on the fire, signaling the end of another successful day. Everyone receives a share of the meal. In a community without refrigerators or food storage, sharing is what keeps the tribe alive. Today, one hunter may provide the meat, but tomorrow that same person may depend on someone else's contribution. To many people today, hunting a wild boar may seem like an adventure in the wilderness. For the Hadzabe, however, it is also a lesson in patience, observation, and respect for every living creature. They hunt only when necessary, take only what the community needs, and make use of nearly every part of the animal. This philosophy has allowed them to preserve their hunter-gatherer way of life for tens of thousands of years, while remaining in harmony with nature. Their story reminds us that humanity's greatest strength does not always come from modern technology, but from our ability to observe, adapt, and truly understand the natural world.
Before every hunt, the Hadzabe men drink fresh goat blood to boost their strength and prepare their minds before entering the harsh African wilderness. But what awaits them is far more than prey. A Nile crocodile over 4 meters long suddenly bursts from the muddy water near the riverbank. Farther away, an African rock python coils beneath layers of dead leaves, while aardvarks roam across the scorching semi-desert. With no guns and no modern technology, the Hadzabe rely only on handmade bows, hunting dogs, and survival skills passed down through generations. Every step could lead to food for the entire tribe, or one mistake that means they never return. As the new day began, the small Hadzabe camp woke to ancient songs echoing through the quiet semi-desert. They danced with the belief that those songs would bring luck and help everyone return safely after the hunt. Before leaving, a few hunters shared a bowl of a nutritious drink obtained from livestock, believing it could strengthen the body and help them keep their energy during long hours under the extreme heat. After that, the group picked up their bows and left the camp to begin the hunt. Aardvarks often appear in this area. Suddenly, everyone stopped beside a freshly disturbed patch of ground, marked by long twisting grooves. They immediately recognized that an aardvark had been searching for food there only a few hours earlier. The group quickly changed direction and followed the trail through low thorny bushes. Then, the aardvarks suddenly appeared. An arrow was fired from close range, and one of them was quickly brought down. As the sun grew harsher, the hunt continued toward a shallow water area hidden deep among the grasslands. Nile crocodiles often appear there. The group used a wooden canoe to approach the prey, then used a long pole to strike. The crocodile immediately thrashed with force, sending mud and water across the swamp. The chase continued for hours under unforgiving heat, until the animal began to weaken near the grassy bank. On the way back to camp, a large movement beneath fallen bushes made the hunting dogs step back and growl low. An old shed skin caught on a dry branch, along with a long drag mark across the sand, signaled the presence of an African rock python. The huge snake was coiled beside a crack in the rocks, its body almost as thick as a small tree trunk and camouflaged with the color of the surrounding earth. The hunters spread out immediately to keep their distance. Instead of using bows and arrows, they decided to capture the python with their hands and a rope. The snake twisted violently, its massive body tightening through the dry grass before gradually slowing down. But what caught the group's attention even more was behind the rock crack. Beneath the soft soil and dry leaves were dozens of python eggs hidden inside the nest. For the hadzabe, they are an extremely valuable food source, especially during times when hunting becomes difficult. When the hunters returned in the late afternoon, smoke was already rising from the small camp. No one kept the best portion for themselves. The meat was divided equally beside the fire. Part of the crocodile was cut and placed into a pot to simmer until tender, while the eggs were saved to be eaten gradually. Conversations and laughter slowly filled the empty land as the whole community shared dinner after a long day. What makes the hadzabe most remarkable is not that they hunt dangerous animals, but how they survive through observation and adaptation. They do not hunt for excess or accumulation. Every footprint in the sand, every movement in the bushes, and every opportunity in the desert can become life for the entire community. In a world increasingly dependent on technology and speed, this way of life feels like an ancient memory of humanity that still exists today.
The sun had just risen above the low bushes of the Tanzanian savanna, and the atmosphere around the Hasdebe camp had become more tense than usual. Large paw prints stretching toward the forest edge revealed that a male lion had been appearing near the tribe's hunting grounds for several consecutive days. To the Hasdebe people, lions were not only the most dangerous predators of the savanna, but also rivals that forced even the most experienced hunters to move with extreme caution. But when herds of antelope and wild boars began disappearing from the familiar hunting areas because of the lion's presence, they understood that this confrontation would eventually become unavoidable. There were no loud noises or chaotic preparations like those of modern hunting teams. The Hasdebe quietly inspected their bows, sharpened their spear tips, and covered their bodies with layers of dust to reduce human scent. Their arrows were coated with poison extracted from local desert plants, weapons that had accompanied them for generations across this harsh land. The hunting trail led them through thick, dry thorn bushes, where the lion's tracks appeared clearly in the soft ground. Several tree branches had been clawed apart, and flattened patches of grass showed that the animal had passed through not long before. The Hasdebe moved extremely slowly, making almost no sound at all. Every step was carefully calculated to avoid snapping dry branches or sending birds scattering from the bushes. In this hunt, even the smallest noise could turn everything deadly. As they approached an area filled with large rocks near the forest edge, the group suddenly discovered the fresh carcass of an antelope. The hindquarters had been torn apart, while the ground around it was covered with drag marks and enormous paw prints. That meant the lion was still very close. The atmosphere instantly became heavy. Several men quickly climbed onto high rocks to observe from a distance, while the remaining hunters crouched low behind thorn bushes, gripping their spears tightly. Then a deep, muffled roar suddenly echoed from the forest edge. The sound was not especially loud, yet it was enough to silence the entire savanna. From within the tall grass, a massive male lion slowly emerged. The dark mane surrounding its neck made it appear even larger beneath the morning sunlight. It did not run immediately, but stood still, watching the hunters with cold, unblinking eyes. In that moment, the distance between man and predator was only a few dozen meters. One Hasdebe hunter on the left began moving in a wide circle to distract the animal. At the same time, a poison-tipped arrow suddenly shot through the scorching air and struck deeply into the lion's shoulder. The beast instantly let out a furious roar before charging straight into the bushes. The group quickly scattered in different directions, never remaining in one spot for too long. They understood that a wounded lion was more dangerous than any other creature on the savanna. The chase continued for hours beneath the brutal African heat. The Hasdebe did not attempt a direct assault, but instead kept their distance while silently following the trail of blood and crushed grass. The poison on the arrow slowly began taking effect, causing the lion's movements to weaken and slow. From time to time, a faint roar echoed in the distance like the final warning of the king of the savannah. As the sun slowly lowered toward the horizon, the hunters finally found the lion lying beneath a large tree in the middle of the barren land. No one rushed forward. They stood motionless for a long time, making sure the animal was no longer capable of fighting back. Only when everything was completely safe did the group slowly approach. For the Hasdebe people, this was not simply a hunt, but also an act of respect toward one of nature's most powerful rivals. They returned to the camp with their prize as women and children erupted into cheers. A fire was quickly lit in the center of the clearing, its golden glow reflecting across faces covered in dust after a long and exhausting day. Songs, dancing, and the steady rhythm of drums echoed throughout the African night. In that wild land, the life of the Hasdebe people continued just as their ancestors had survived for thousands of years, relying on hunting skills, patience, and courage to face the harshest forces of nature.
Across the dry lands surrounding Lake Eyasi, water is the most valuable resource. During long dry seasons, the few remaining waterholes become gathering places for countless animals. However, these life-sustaining areas are also home to dangerous predators. Along the muddy shores, crocodiles often lie motionless for hours, patiently waiting for an opportunity to strike. The Hasdebe people have understood this threat for generations and avoid direct confrontation, knowing that a single mistake can have serious consequences.
They use intelligence and strength to achieve.
Even so, they must approach these water sources every day, where the line between safety and danger remains incredibly thin. As the first rays of sunlight appear on the horizon, the Hasdebe hunters leave their camp. In their hands are the handmade bows that have long been part of their daily lives. Without modern technology or navigation equipment, they rely entirely on their ability to read nature. Fresh footprints in the soil, flattened grass, and well-used animal trails all provide valuable clues that guide them toward potential prey. The journey continues in silence. The hunters move carefully, using the landscape to conceal their presence. Once an animal is spotted among the scattered bushes, the group quickly adjusts their positions to gain an advantage.
Insects pollinating.
Every step is calculated to close the distance without drawing attention. When the right moment arrives, the bows are drawn tight and arrows are released. Success is never guaranteed, but patience and persistence remain essential parts of their hunting tradition. After the hunt is over, the work begins immediately. Everyone naturally takes on a role without needing instructions or formal assignments. For the Azabe, hunting is not about proving individual strength. It is a responsibility shared by the entire community. The food that is obtained belongs to everyone, not just the hunter who made the successful shot. By midday, the group gathers at a familiar location to prepare a communal meal. They do not hunt more than they truly need. Instead, they take only what is necessary to sustain themselves. This balanced approach has helped them live alongside nature for countless generations. Very little is wasted, and every usable part of the animal is put to practical use. Beyond providing food, many animals also hold cultural significance within Azabe traditions. Elders often share knowledge passed down through generations about how certain animal parts were once used in traditional practices. While some of these beliefs may differ from modern science, they reflect the deep connection between the community and the natural world. Each hunt serves not only as a source of food, but also as a way of preserving ancestral knowledge. When the food is brought back to camp, it is shared among everyone. What stands out most is not their hunting ability, but their strong sense of community. No one tries to keep more than their fair share. Elders, women, children, and even the dogs that accompany the hunters all receive a portion. These dogs are more than companions. They help track animals, warn of danger, and support the hunters throughout many stages of the journey. As darkness settles over Lake Iasi, the community gathers around the fire after a long day in the harsh wilderness. During the day, they travel across vast landscapes following animal tracks.
鸭呀，
At night, they return to their families and continue a way of life that has endured for countless generations. Perhaps it is this combination of unity and survival skills that has allowed the Azeeb people to overcome the challenges of the wild for so long. If you enjoyed learning about the Azeeb way of life, don't forget to like and subscribe for more fascinating stories about people and nature from around the world.
If a day began without schedules or anything urgent to chase, could life still feel complete? For the Hadzabe people living around Lake Ayasi, the answer is yes. When the first light appears over the savannah, they wake up to continue a way of life that has existed for thousands of years. It is a life based on hunting and gathering, where each day is guided by nature rather than clocks or work schedules. The Hadzabe own very few possessions and rarely make long-term plans. Carrying their bows and arrows, they quietly leave their camp and move through familiar grasslands and bushland. Along the way, they observe the ground, listen to sounds, and pay attention to even the smallest changes in their surroundings. For them, hunting is not a competition or a way to prove themselves, but simply a method of finding food for the community. Before each journey, the men sit together and prepare their bows and arrows. There are no modern tools, only wood, animal sinew, plant resin, and stone. Every arrow is handmade using knowledge accumulated over many generations. Some arrowheads are coated with plant extracts to improve hunting effectiveness. These skills are not written down but passed on through observation and practice until they become second nature. As they move deeper into the forest, the group speaks very little. They keep enough distance to move freely while still working together. Along the way, they encounter many animals, including a serval quietly crossing through the grass. No one stops for long because such encounters are a normal part of daily life. For the Hadzabe, the forest is not a place to conquer but a shared living space with countless other species. After hours of following tracks, the hunters discover an African civet. There are no cheers or displays of excitement, every movement is careful and patient. When the hunt ends, they simply nod quietly, as if completing a necessary task. For the Hadzabe, hunting is not a symbol of power or victory but a part of maintaining balance with nature. The Hadzabe do not always continue moving forward. They are especially cautious when approaching water sources, which sustain life but are also the territory of Nile crocodiles. When the risk appears too great, they willingly step back rather than take unnecessary chances. To them, survival does not mean overcoming every challenge but understanding personal limits and knowing when to stop. Sometimes caution is more important than courage. Alongside hunting, honey is one of the most valuable food sources for the Hadzabe. They search for wild beehives with very few tools, relying mainly on knowledge passed down through generations. When they find honey, they take only what they need and eat it on the spot. This food source not only provides energy but also reflects the close connection between people and their environment. One remarkable aspect of Hadzabe life is that they rarely store food. They trust the natural cycles that have sustained their community for tens of thousands of years. When food is brought back, sharing becomes the most important thing. No one keeps a private portion for themselves, everyone gathers around the fire and divides the food fairly among all members of the community. Hadzabe children learn to share from a very young age. They understand that food not only nourishes the body but also strengthens community bonds. Many researchers consider this to be one of the most egalitarian societies in the world, where personal accumulation is uncommon and the well-being of the group always comes first. As the sun sets, Hadzabe families gather around the fire, talking and sharing food together. Their way of life shows that peace does not necessarily come from owning more, but from the connections people build with one another. If you found this story interesting, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from and subscribe to the channel.
A buffalo is not an ordinary.
Dawn arrives quickly across the vast plains of northern Tanzania. As the first rays of sunlight touch the dry bushes surrounding Lake Iasi, the Hadzabe hunters have already been awake for hours. They have no clocks and no calendars. Their lives are guided only by the rising sun, the tracks left by animals, and the hunger that comes with a new day. A young hunter carries a short bow carved from hardwood. His slender arrows are tipped with metal points coated in poison made from the sap of forest trees. Slung over his shoulder is a small leather pouch, not for carrying food, but for carrying the hope of a successful morning hunt. Today, they are hunting a wild buffalo. The Hadzabe hunters never rush. They move slowly, carefully scanning everything around them. On the sandy ground, an older hunter kneels and points to a set of deep hoof prints beside a thorny bush. To an outsider, they look like ordinary marks, but to him, they're a map left behind by a herd of wild buffalo that passed through earlier. The group quietly follows the trail. After a long walk, they finally spot the herd near a large bush. The hunters silently spread out to approach from different directions. An arrow flies through the air and strikes one of the animals. Wounded, the buffalo charges forward but gradually weakens as the poison begins to take effect. The hunters keep a safe distance, patiently waiting until it collapses before moving in. Today's meal is secured. There are no loud celebrations, only a few quiet smiles. To the Hadzabe, bringing down prey is not a victory. It's simply part of everyday life. But the plains are not always generous. Sometimes, the tracks lead them to something far more dangerous. A long, winding mark across the sand brings the group to a stop. One hunter studies the area before pointing toward the ground. It's the trail of a giant python. The snake has disappeared into a narrow crack between the rocks, and no one knows how large it really is. One hunter steps forward. There are no guns, no large knives, only a bow and a handful of arrows. An arrow is fired into the crevice. Suddenly, the python explodes out with a body as thick as a living tree trunk. The hunters immediately pin its head to the ground with long wooden poles. The struggle lasts only a few tense seconds. At last, the python lies still. Another source of food has been added to the day's harvest. The Hadzabe do not live on meat alone. While the men hunt, the women and children search for wild tubers, berries, and honey. They know which plants are safe to eat, which roots store water, and which beehives can be harvested without provoking the bees. Honey provides sugar, energy, and a source of joy for the entire community. The Hadzabe never store food. Meat is roasted and eaten the same day. Honey is shared, and wild fruit is divided among everyone. Tomorrow will bring another hunt. If today's hunt is successful, they eat well. If it fails, they simply eat less.
Debes leer las huellas de los animales, como a un viejo amigo. La mayoría de nosotros plantas la contienen. Si quieres vivir,
Yet no one seems worried about tomorrow. Imagine waking up one morning on the plains of Tanzania with no phone, no supermarket, and no bottled water. If you want food, you must know how to read animal tracks. If you want water, you must know which plants can provide it. If you want to survive, you must understand nature like an old friend. Most of us would probably struggle from the very first day. Not because the plains are too harsh, but because we've forgotten how to read the natural world. As the sun slowly disappears beyond the plains surrounding Lake Iasi, the hunters return to camp. Buffalo meat roasts over the fire, while pieces of python are shared among the group. The children sit around the flames with honey still sticking to their hands. Laughter echoes through the night. There are no concrete houses and no city lights. Only fire, a sky filled with stars, and people who have lived this way for tens of thousands of years. With no permanent home, they carry light lives, knowing that tomorrow may lead them on another journey.
I spent several days living with the Hadzabe people near Lake Iasi in northern Tanzania. No one ever told me where we were going, what we were hunting, or when we would return. They simply walked into the forest, and I followed behind them. In this dry and unforgiving land, the forest is not a place for adventure or exploration the way many outsiders often imagine. For the Hadzabe, the forest provides everything: food, water, energy, and the knowledge needed to survive. There is no fixed schedule for how a day is supposed to unfold here. As the sun slowly rose above the horizon, several men quietly stood up, carrying bows, small knives, and long, sharpened sticks. We crossed an area covered in low bushes when one of the men suddenly signaled for everyone to stop. He crouched down and stared closely at a dry bush near the ground. At first, I saw nothing unusual until I noticed a thick body of a python about the size of a wrist, perfectly camouflaged among the dry leaves. No one panicked. The men quickly exchanged glances and communicated with soft clicking sounds in their language. One of them stepped forward with a wooden bow in his hands, instead of shooting immediately. He slowly drew the bowstring and aimed into the bush, forcing the python to move and reveal more of its body. For several tense seconds, no one moved. Then the arrow flew. Once the animal was under control, I leaned down and firmly held its head to make sure it could no longer strike. Only then did I realize I had almost stopped breathing the entire time. Around me, the men simply looked at the python lying on the ground and quietly nodded to one another, as if everything had happened exactly as expected. A while later, the group stopped beside a patch of soft ground near rocks warmed by the sun. One man pointed toward a faint winding mark in the dusty sand, a trace I almost completely overlooked. According to them, it was a path the python had taken before being discovered in the bushes earlier. From that moment on, the entire group slowed down. They carefully studied every crack between the rocks and every dry tree stump with astonishing focus. For the Hadzabe, even the smallest marks on sand or dry leaves are enough to understand how an animal moved through an area. We continued deeper into the forest. After some time, one of the men pointed toward a hollow tree trunk where a small colony of bees had built a nest inside. What caught my attention was not the taste of the honey, but the way they shared it. The person who found the hive did not keep more for himself. The one who cut the honeycomb did not take the first portion either. Everything was shared naturally and evenly, as if that was simply the way life worked here. During hunting trips that lasted for hours, honey became a quick source of energy directly provided by the forest itself. Once everyone finished eating, they wiped their hands, put out the smoking bundle, and continued walking as though it had only been a short pause along the journey. After walking farther, we stopped in a small clearing and decided to prepare the python right there. The snake was cut into manageable pieces. A small fire was quickly built using dry branches. There were no pots, pans, or complicated tools. Several pieces of meat were placed directly onto the glowing coals. Before long, the smell of roasting meat spread across the savannah. Once the meat was cooked, we sliced it into smaller portions and shared it among everyone. python meat was firm and slightly chewy. It tasted somewhat like chicken, but richer and stronger. There was no salt or seasoning at all, yet after hours of walking through thick brush, the hot meat tasted surprisingly good. As I sat beside the fire, watching everyone eat, talk, and laugh together, I began to realize something important. What makes the Hadzabe way of life so different is not simply that they hunt and gather food. It is the way they live alongside the environment around them. They do not store large amounts of food, nor do they carry many possessions into the forest. Instead, they rely on their deep understanding of nature, knowing where to find water, where honey may be hidden, and where animals are most likely to appear. The forest sustains them, and they understand it deeply enough to survive within it.
The atmosphere by the water was unbelievably quiet. The surface of the lake lay as smooth as a giant mirror reflecting the sky. With no loud sounds and no obvious signs of life. But to the Hadzabe people, that very stillness was the most suspicious thing of all. They understood that beneath the seemingly harmless water could be hiding one of the most dangerous predators in the wilderness. As the sun gradually climbed higher, the group moved toward the water's edge. Before them stretched damp bands of sand and a few faint tracks leading from the shore into the water before disappearing. To others, those traces might have meant nothing, but to hunters who had spent their entire lives observing nature, they were a clear message that something already claimed this place. No one walked directly to the water's edge. The group slowed down, placing each step carefully on the soft ground. They avoided making any unnecessary noise, because in an environment like this, even the slightest disturbance could change the situation. Their eyes constantly scanned every direction. They were not only watching the surface of the water, but also paying attention to unusual colors in the mud, dark patches beneath the trees, and even small ripples that appeared and vanished. A crocodile is a master of camouflage. It does not need to move much to become nearly invisible. That is why the real hunt begins with patience rather than action. After many minutes of observation, one member of the group quietly signaled. No words were spoken. A simple nod was enough for everyone to understand what was happening. They quickly adjusted their positions, spreading out in a wide arc along the shoreline while maintaining contact through eye movements. A gentle breeze sent steady ripples across the lake. Then, among countless natural movements, something unusual appeared. A dark object shifted briefly before disappearing beneath the surface. To an outsider, it might have looked like nothing more than a drifting log. But to the Hadzabe, it was the target. What happened next unfolded far more quickly than the earlier silence had suggested. The entire group sprang into action at once. The distance was closed in a matter of seconds. The water suddenly erupted with powerful movement. Large waves spread outward in every direction, shattering the stillness that had dominated the morning. The struggle lasted only a short time, but it was intense. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything gradually settled. The lake returned to its peaceful appearance, as if nature had just concealed a secret known only to those who were there to witness it. After leaving the water's edge, the group moved to a drier area to process their catch. The work began immediately with remarkable skill and efficiency. There was not a moment of hesitation. Each person took on the task they knew best. Usable parts were carefully set aside, while anything unnecessary was quickly discarded. Every movement was precise and effective, reflecting knowledge and experience passed down through generations of survival in the wild. Once the initial preparation was complete, their attention shifted to another familiar task, preparing a meal. Dry branches were gathered from the surrounding area and arranged into a small pile. Before long, the first sparks appeared, and a fire slowly took shape. They needed no stove or modern equipment, only a steady source of heat and their own experience. The food was placed near the glowing embers, where the warmth spread evenly and gradually. When the food reached the desired level of doneness, everyone began taking their share. No one gave instructions, and no rules were spoken aloud. Those sitting closest took their portions first, and naturally shared with the people around them. Pieces of food were passed from hand to hand in a familiar rhythm. Some ate immediately while the food was still hot, while others left theirs near the embers for a few more minutes. The pace differed from person to person, yet it never felt disconnected. Everything blended into a natural sense of unity. Gradually, the meal came to an end. A few people stood up first to gather the items they needed to carry with them. Others remained seated a little longer, enjoying the peaceful afternoon. The small fire had faded to a handful of glowing coals. For the Hadzabe, this was not a special event, but simply a familiar part of everyday life. From observing nature and searching for food to preparing and sharing the harvest, everything flowed seamlessly, like the natural rhythm of a new day, ending as gently as it had begun.